Hello, hello, hello. Thank y'all again. I'm sorry I'm late on this video. Just wanted to touch bases with you. I am back in the States, so I could knock this out for you. I'll do the second part of this probably tomorrow as well. But this just consider this lecture 5. and obviously this is your last week, right? This is week 3, so I know, for some of you, you're glad it's pretty much over. Short, short 3-week experience to kind of get an introduction to what I do and the things that I think about from a philosophical perspective. So let's just get right into it, right? So in this third week, before you dealt with the last kind of questions you all dealt with was issues of self-reflection, and I entered that same exercise with you, and I talked about some things that have been on my mind lately in my own little personal video that I put on social media the other day from talking to somebody on the cruise. But we're going to move a little bit further and push this. You have a few more readings this week you've probably seen in the reading packet. So I'm going to touch a little bit on those and get you ready, right? So, the question for me is, how should we live if life is already fragile, right? So you're going to read some Epicurus this week, some Augustine's Confessions, a little excerpt of that. Albert Camus, a French philosopher, The Myth of Sisyphus. Victor Frankl, which a lot of people don't read, but he has a piece called Man's Search for Meaning, right? So you think about some terms. We're going to deal with fear, restlessness, absurdity, meaning, hope, and death, right? So think about philosophy has always had a certain relationship with death, right? Not because we're morbid, right? But because death kind of tells the truth about the finite or the finality of time, right? It asks what even matters in this thing called life, right? What kind of life are we building while we still have breath and a chance to do it? Of course, in what we do in philosophy, a lot of times, a lot of classes don't talk about death, right? And I think they're wasting your time. They're distracting themselves or yourselves, right, with just other stuff, with noise, consumption, uh, commodification, all that kind of stuff, except for what the question we can't avoid, which is death, right? But what are you doing with your life? What are you afraid of, right? What do you love, right? What would remain meaningful if something else had disappeared, right? What have you kind of postponed? What have you put off because you assume you got unlimited time, right? So those are things that we need to think about when we talk about this week, right? So you read Epicurus, right? Epicurus is saying something like um, that death shouldn't dominate us with fear, right? Because when we're alive, death isn't present per se, right? Because obviously, when we're dead, right, we're no longer there to experience life, right? So it's nothing to be afraid of, right? The fear of death is misplaced, right? I know it sounds too neat. Death does matter to folk. You don't want to die, but how can we be afraid of something we would never experience, right? Um, so Epicurus is not asking us to become cold hearted to the truth, right, of the cessation of life, but he's trying to tell you that we can't steal life from life, right? So some people die long before they're dead, right? Because life has assumed, sort of taken on their own lives because they're afraid to love and to experience and to change and to begin all over again, right? Epicurus is asking those type of questions, right? He's asking, what is the fear of death that's making you what? Less alive, right? What's trying to control you and everything in a way that's trying to avoid the truth that time is limited, right? What if the anxiety of legacy or the anxiety of of failure or loss is preventing you from living the very day that you're given, today, right? Augustine is a little bit different, right? Uh, Augustine says that we're restless creatures, or we're creatures of desire. We search for rest. We attach ourselves to things, hoping that it will satisfy the ache, right? That sometimes we feel, pleasure, romance, achievement, reputation, power, even, right? I was just talking about Bezos earlier about something like that, right? But even religion, right? All that can become places where we try to quiet the restlessness of the soul, right? That's St. Augustine, right? Um, a desire he talks about a lot, right? And desire speaks to the fact that we are creatures beyond ourselves, right? That we can ask like finite questions to carry weight, right? We can ask a relationship to save us from ourselves, right? We can ask for a grade to tell us what our worth. I need an A, right? We can create something that create. We can ask money, for instance, to create peace or try to create happiness. We can ask politicians to give us identity. Who are we as Americans, right? We can ask for applause to become a substitution for love, right? That's Augustine. Augustine wants us to say that it's not just what I believe, but what do I love, right? And is what I love capable of carrying the weight that we're putting on the very thing, right? That's a question for you to think about. What do you love, right? And is that thing that you love, is it carrying you, right? Much of life is all about love, right? Things that we love, people that we love. But sometimes when we love things for the wrong order, in the wrong order, right? We must love a sort of sense of purpose, yes, but we have to think about intention, right? Why is it that we're loving the thing or the person that we love, right? Why? Because human beings, we search for order, for justice, for clarity, right? That's Albert Camus, right? In a sense, right? Good people suffer, right? And cruel people prosper, right? How do you understand that, right? Plans collapse, right? Um, the people die too soon, right? You can do everything right and still lose the game, right? That's absurdity to Camus, right? It's the collision between a longing for meaning and a world that does not guarantee that that very thing that you're searching for will take place, right? He has this story called the Myth of Sisyphus, right? And Sisyphus is condemned to roll a stone up a hill, and the stone keeps coming down, right? But he has to keep doing it over and over again. And many of us live a Sisyphean life, right? We sort of emotionally keep pushing stuff up a proverbial hill, right? Always for it to come down and having to do it again. Another family issues, another national crisis, another grief to deal with, another bad grade, bad friendships to prove ourselves after falling back into old habits, right? The stone that we've been pushing up always seems to come back down. But Camus says that this is heavy. Don't get me wrong, but it's not something that we give up on. The hill is not going to be easy to Camus, right? That we must somehow deal with the meaninglessness by continually to create meaning and bear witness to the very thing that is relatively absurd, right? It's not hope, it's not sentiments, right? It's to try to find a revolt against the absurd, right? To find a passion, right? And then I think you got Frankl that I threw in there. He's a psychiatrist, right? A little bit different, right? He's a Jewish Holocaust survivor, and he argues that we as humans are deeply shaped by the search for meaning, right? And we have to be careful not to romanticize suffering, like some folks do, because some suffering is actually evil, right? And some suffering should actually be resisted and condemned, right? Um, Frankl wants us to think about that all suffering don't have lessons. People say it's just a lesson. No, no, no. Hold Frankl, again, who survived the Holocaust, says, no, that stuff can be dangerous. He says that he asks that can meaning survive even when happiness has been taken away, right? Meaningfulness is not the same as happiness. Happiness is a feeling. Meaningfulness is a commitment, is a reason to commit, to continue, a responsibility that causes you to almost be outside of yourselves or past yourselves, right? Service or courage or faith, right? Those things are family, even, right? Can be your process toward refusing to let the suffering have the last word, right? So this distinction is important, I think, and I wanted to say that if you confuse meaning with happiness, I was just having this conversation with my girlfriend a few hours ago, that every lack of success may feel like failure, but some of the most meaningful moments of life is just not happy, right? When you sit behind someone who's dying, for instance, it's not a happy moment, but it can be meaningful, right? Right? Telling the truth after years of silence or after years of being mute may not be happy, but it can be meaningful, right? Raising children, trust me, I'm a dad. It ain't always happy, right? But it can be meaningful, right? Serving community, grieving, forgiving folk, um, create art, right? Showing up even when you're tired, right? These may not feel happy moments, right? But they carry meaning, right? So let's put this together, right? Epicurus says, don't let the fear of death steal life from you, right? Augustine says, examine your things that you love because disordered love makes the soul restless. Write that down, post that, right? Camus says, absurdity it escapes us from suffering. And Frankl says that absurdity is something we need to deal with, right? It's not that it's going to take away uh, 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 a complete. It's not going to create a completion. It's not going to create happiness at all time, but will create meaning, right? So the philosophy, in general, the way I approach philosophy, confronts absurdity. It searches for meaning without lying about suffering, right? And as you finish this reading and these readings, I want you to ask yourself this question. And this may, hopefully, it'll stay with you longer than even these 3 weeks in this course. What gives your life meaning when maybe happiness isn't available? Everything may not be going well. The grade may not be the best. The money may not be the best. The relationship may be too easy, and the world may be calm, right? What gives your life meaning when the stone of Sisyphus rolls back downhill, right? What does that, right? So answer these questions for me. What is Epicurus's argument about why death should not dominate life with fear? What is that? Second question, what does Augustine mean by restlessness and disordered love? The third is, how does Camus define the absurd, right? Fourth, is Sisyphus an important image and for you to think about, the hill, the rock, that kind of thing? In Frankl, what is the difference between happiness and meaning? Okay? And y'all got that? Right? You can rewind this. It ain't but a short, like 12-minute meeting lecture, but I want you to think about those things. Rewatch this video. Make sure you catch these. Again, this is just to set you up for the readings, right? You're going to read on your own, right? But I just thought I'd set it up, right? But these, quite frankly, are important writers to your professor, right? Um, Albert Camus, Augustine, um, Epicurus, right? So you may have heard of the term Stoicism, right? Or Stoics, right? In the ancient times. Well, Epicurus was one of the famous Stoics, right? Um, and Viktor Frankl has a powerful Jewish German story about surviving the Holocaust. So if you ever get a chance, just to even the excerpt outside the excerpt that I gave you, to read some Frankl, man, that's some good reading, right? Of course, I'm one of my favorite Jewish writers is Martin Buber, right? But but Frankl is powerful, dude. Right. So, all right, a little bit of something. I'll think about tomorrow's kind of short lecture for that last set of readings. But I wanted to get this out to you tonight because I know you didn't have, it was due. I should have done it yesterday, but I couldn't get it done. So that's my bad. Hope you're doing well on this Monday. And like I said, I'll get that next video to you. Let me ponder a little bit and think about what you're reading. And I'll get you a quick 10-15 minute video tomorrow, no later than Wednesday morning. All right. God bless you. Stay strong.